I think of making and creativity and inventing, as a muscle, and that we need to exercise the maker muscle.
This is the Discovery Files podcast from the U.S. National Science Foundation. I'm Nate Potker. Invention and innovation are essential to developing technology, the STEM workforce, and jobs of the future. Scientific and engineering discoveries have broad societal impacts, and inspiring the next generation is crucial to realizing those futures. We are joined today by Cori Lathan, who has spent her career inventing, founding and running a company, and inspiring future generations through robotics. She has now added author to her list of accomplishments with her book, Inventing the Future. Dr. Lathan, thank you for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Nathan.
So I wanted to start with some of your early interests. Like, how early did you get interested in robotics?
So, I don't remember being specifically interested in robotics. I was really interested in cool tech. So, I was a big Star Trek fan. So and what I loved about Star Trek, not only, of course, the great storylines and characters, but also the technology. I loved, the holodeck and the replicator and the transporter and the tricorder. Like that. I think that's what I was fascinated with, the technology of the future. And certainly, as the series progressed, the AI characters and, robotics and AI. So I think that's what I was excited about, technology, not necessarily robotics per se. I see robotics as a tool. And I just, throughout my life, I've seen technology as a tool to do cool things with and for humans.
One of the things you talked about in your book a little bit was connecting creativity to creation and invention. Where do you kind of thread the needle with those ideas? Like, where do they cross over for you?
Yeah, I think the emergence of the maker movement encompasses it all. And that's what I've loved about the maker movement. No one would question that the maker movement is about creativity. No one would question that the maker movement is about invention. But rarely do you hear people talk about creativity and invention together, especially technology invention. And so for me, it's the maker movement. It's what did you make today? That should be a something we ask every child, every person. We should ask ourselves, what did you make today?
Right, because I think kids have a lot more of that just built into them as they're exploring the world and kind of coming to terms with what anything is, having different ideas. I wanted to start as we connect the dots towards getting to you creating things. You started out in academia before you kind of pivoted over. Can you talk a little bit about being open to changes in direction?
Yeah, for me, of course, as you're going through school, people ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? Or, and we're forced into majors in college, which kind of define that as well. For me, I was never so worried about titles. I wanted to do cool things. I wanted to be an astronaut. Okay, so to be an astronaut, you need to get a degree, in science and technology. Or to be a professor, you need to get a PhD in something. It was more about, what did I want to do with my life? What did I want to do research? In which case, and did I want to do research on technology and human physiology? So then I need to study those things, and then somehow I need to label it and put a degree on it. So I really backed into it. I the only thing I said I ever wanted to be was an astronaut. And I failed at that, but that's okay. I did a lot of cool things anyway.
Right. Like failure is a good opportunity to learn something new and put it forward into something else. So can we start with when you formed the company Anthrotronix? You got some grants from us, which we would love to hear you speak about a little bit. And following that, can you tell me some of your early lessons from the startup world?
Yeah. So, when I left graduate school, I went to MIT and got graduate degrees in aerospace engineering and neuroscience because at the time, there wasn't a degree in biomedical engineering, but the field was emerging. And so I went on to be a professor of biomedical engineering and realized very quickly that academia wasn't allowing me to do the things I wanted to do, and that was invent and create. At the time, this was in late '90s. The technologies of robotics and sensors and virtual reality were really just coming to the forefront. They were considered emerging technologies then, which I find very amusing because we're still calling them emerging technologies in some ways. And so I really wanted to see how I could use these technologies to enable human capability. So I took a leave of absence and started my company, Anthrotronix, Anthro human, Tronics instrumentation. And we started the company with two grants and contracts because I was a professor. I was very good at getting grants and contracts. And I started Anthrotronix to really bring robots to kids with disabilities. I felt that the emerging area of robotics could help kids with disabilities reach their full potential through being educational as also therapeutic combined in one. So started the company as a traditional startup, went out to get funding, and the night that we released our private placement offering was the night before 9/11. So, you learn in startup world to roll with the punches. Rarely do you get dealt punches like 9/11 or COVID or, these are all pretty dramatic events. And most startups fold when faced with those obstacles. Well, because I had come from academia, I was very comfortable with proposal writing, and I knew about the National Science Foundation, and I knew the type of grants and contracts that NSF supported. And I had served on review committees as a professor. And so I applied for a small business innovation research grant from NSF. And we got it. So it kept our company alive. I mean, it was what funded the development of our first product, which became Cosmo's Learning System, which was an educational toolkit for kids with disabilities. Now, it wasn't a robot per se, because it turned out that bringing hardware to market is hard and expensive. So we ended up designing an accessible computer interface and custom software that starred our Cosmobot character, which the kids had fallen in love with. And we kept the robot as a research tool. And so with funding from National Science Foundation, Department of Education, even NIH, we were able to bring our product to market through using the SBIR program.
Very cool. And it's an interesting story seeing it come from the earlier stages as more interactive tool to getting developed into being the program more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can we, another topic you kind of bring up, or concept I should say, is talking about technology transfer and how these things you might start out working on one bit and it might develop into something else. Right. Can you talk a little bit about your experience with that?
Yeah. So there's two concepts that are related. One is technology transfer, and that's when, something is developed for one application. Like there's a lot of examples from NASA technology, like the people are familiar maybe with the space blanket or Velcro that were developed for space flight, but then used commonly for Earth-based applications. But there's also another concept called dual use technology. And that's when you take an emerging technology like virtual reality, for example, and you develop it for, let's say, training. Training someone to navigate to navigate a space that could be used both for let's say patients going through rehabilitation, through stroke, that need to relearn some of their skills. It could also be used for someone from the military who's learning to navigate a space that they haven't been in yet. So there's this concept that they're related concepts, technology transfer and dual use. And normally we think of the technologies being funded or developed for the military or for NASA and then used in civilian use. We did something different. We actually had developed when we developed Cosmos Learning System, we did a lot of work with sensors and wearable sensors for these kids with disabilities. Because if you can imagine, a child with cerebral palsy may have very gross motor movement, meaning they don't have fine motor control, but they can control generally where their hand is in space. So we would do things like instrument a glove, so that we could capture whatever movement they had, and then use that, we could map that to controlling, say, a mouse on a computer. So if they couldn't do this, but they could do this, we could capture that with wearable sensors. And instead of saying, what can't they do, we could say, what can they do? And we could capture it and map that to robot control.
Really, how can you optimize what is possible?
Yes.
One of the other inventions I wanted to ask you about was using the neuroscience end of things and the Dana and the games for brain and the idea of kind of cognitive assessment tools for older people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And this is example of tech transfer in the more traditional way if we think of tech transfer. The military had a problem in that deployed soldiers our men and women who are deployed are faced with conditions that can cause cognitive it's not so much cognitive decline as cognitive changes. So fatigue, right. Combat fatigue and stress can change your cognition. It could reduce your attention. But then in the extreme cases, for example, if you have a blast injury, it can cause impairment, cognitive impairment, because of the blast injury, or PTSD or depression. So the problem that the military was facing was not only from concussions, but also from all of these other things that were combining, and there's also a suicide crisis. So the military wanted to address this by developing a tool that could very rapidly see if a soldier's cognition had changed. So something very sensitive but not specific to concussion or depression or PTSD or fatigue. So we were hired by the military to do kind of scientific review, figure out what were the best, most accurate cognitive tests that could sensitively detect a change. And we developed the Dana Brain Vital. And this became one of the very first medical mobile apps, and then went to the FDA and really educated the FDA on what it was to have an app that could assist in medical evaluation. And it was before the FDA had guidance documents on this. And so we were really at the forefront. And then we took the Dana Brain Vital, and now it's being used commercially as well. Now, back to your question about aging and what are some of the big areas that we think about brain health. Absolutely, aging. Can we detect changes in our brain health before they get to a point where it's a problem, a clinical and functional problem? And I start so many of my talks with a simple question to the audience, and I'll ask you, Nate, Have you ever misplaced your keys as you're walking out the door?
Not keys, but I forget names all the
Names.
time.
Well, that was
Horrible
going to be
names.
my next question. So you somehow have solved the key problem that everyone else seems to have, but the name problem, right? That we also seem to have. Well, and then, I'll ask you, how do you know if that's normal or if you have early onset Alzheimer's?
I don't.
And we don't, because we don't have a brain vital. We track our
Right.
body mass index from the time we're born obsessively. But we don't do anything to measure our brain health. So what we really developed was a brain thermometer. How can we quickly test our brain health, specifically attention and processing speed, which is the building block of all of our other cognitive functions. And we think this could help not only in looking at our brains as we age to see if we're on a normal course, but also when we change medications. Medications can have negative side effects as well as positive side effects. Or if we have a concussion, or if we have COVID. One of the studies that Dana's being used for right now is with long COVID. The Johns Hopkins Medical Hospital has been using Dana in their long COVID clinic for the past 2 years. So, so there's lots of things that affect our brain health, including a bad night's sleep.
Right. Absolutely.
So, and that can, if you go on with that too long, it can be, it can, anyway, led to a lot of bad things, bad juju.
Right. One of the other inventions that I thought was really interesting was your string device and thinking about electroceuticals. If I pronounce that right.
Yep.
Electroceuticals, and using electricity in different ways like that. Like I think a lot of us have seen, say, a TENS device, but
Yep.
Can you talk about the string device a little bit?
Yeah. So that, so the string device came out of some really exciting conversations that I had with Dr. Kevin Tracy, who's the president of the Feinstein Institutes at Northwell Health. And his research over the past, couple decades was really groundbreaking. In particular, because of the immune response. Prior to his and some others' research, we thought of the immune system as only being a chemical response. And he showed that it actually can be mediated through the nervous system, specifically through the vagus nerve, which is the longest nerve in the body. And it goes from your brainstem to all your organs and back again. And we hear a lot about the vagus nerve now because it also mediates your parasympathetic system. So every yoga class you take now, they'll say, and now we're going to stimulate our vagus nerve through our breathing. Okay, so the vagus nerve does a lot, and it's this amazing nerve that we can only access from the surface of the body in one place, and that's the Simbakanka part of your ear, which I'm going to show you how to find that part of your ear. Well, I can't because you have on headphones, but good. Okay, so stick your finger in your ear, your auditory canal, so you can't hear me, and then put your other finger right above it and take out your first finger, and that's your Simbakanka. So if you rub that, you're actually stimulating your vagus nerve.
Interesting.
And so what we wanted to do was put electricity through that part of your ear, like you do with the TENS unit on your muscles, for example, for pain, or to stimulate, muscles during physical therapy. And so very similar, but also quite different, because when you're stimulating the vagus nerve, it's not a TENS unit type stimulation. You really want to look at your physiological parameters. So it is physically electricity, just like the TENS unit, but you want to really understand what mechanism and how your vagus nerve responds to different aspects of other physiological parameters.
How do you measure that? Is that like a longer period of electricity, or what's the consideration for that part?
Well, some of the work that's being done out of Harvard Mass General Hospital is to respiratory gate the stimulation. It's a wide open field, and there's a lot of people getting into it. And the concept of electroceuticals is very appealing because it could be a lot. It could be a lot less expensive than pharmaceuticals. It could be used in conjunction with pharmaceuticals, which tend to only be, most people are only partial responders to pharmaceuticals or may become less responsive to pharmaceuticals over time. So it could be a really safe and inexpensive adjunct to pharmaceuticals, as well as potentially standing on its own as a therapeutic.
So kind of as we head towards the end, I want to look more towards the future. One of the things that you've worked on is this kind of inspiring students situation with robotics. And I think your daughters were involved in a program with the school system locally. Can you talk a little bit about those efforts?
Yeah, of course. So, I think of making and creativity and inventing, as a muscle, and that we need to exercise the maker muscle. And there's so many ways we can do that. One of the ways that I did that with my kids, I have two daughters. We did the first Lego League, where we used Legos, which they love, to actually, meet challenges. And then we also did the VEX robotics competition, where they would build robots and compete against each other, and as well as present a project on the use of robotics. So because robotics were exciting to me, I tried to share that with my kids, and the teamwork and the confidence that it built was fantastic. So that's something I did with my kids. I'm involved with maker spaces. In our area, we have the Kid Museum in Bethesda, Maryland, which is the largest dedicated makerspace in the U.S. And that's a place where it really does the amazing job of combining creativity and technology and in all different ways, whether it's using woodwork or robotics or textiles or popsicle sticks. I mean, whatever it might be, the idea is that you can go in there and you can make something, and you can use your creative spirit. It could be coding. Coding is can be a very creative process. So exercising that maker muscle is something we should all do, and we should encourage each other to do at any age.
So the last thought I kind of wanted to explore a little bit was your sense of optimism in the future.
Yeah, so technology is exciting. We could always look at the dark side, and we do need to figure out what unintended consequences might be. But I don't think that should distract from the agency that we have in creating the future we want to see. And we're not going to be able to do that without technology. So I'm very excited about, the metaverse and generative AI and robotics and all of these things to create a future that's more equitable, that involves a diverse and wide audience in technology and creating that future, and in a future that enables us to not only reach our abilities to our full capacity, but beyond our capacities as humans. I'm excited about that, and we all have a hand and a role to play in that.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was a fantastic conversation.
Thanks so much, Nate. It was great to talk to you.
For the Discovery Files, I'm Nate Potker. Special thanks to Cori Lathan. Discover how the U.S. National Science Foundation is advancing research at nsf.gov.